Okay, everyone. So this is the first problem that I came up with. Let's see if we can get this to work. So what we're trying to do is probably make some sort of gusset bracket that joins these two 1x2s, these Vex VersaFrame 1x2s. So you'll notice that it's a kind of a weird angle at first. So if you click here and here, you'll see the angle between these two is not showing up. Why is this not showing up? Okay. So the angle is 126.4 degrees. And you can see that in the sketch is 180 times 126.4. Okay. So we're going to make a plate that joins these two pieces of metal together. So sometimes you'll see this in the context of the robot. So I'm going to show you two different methods how to do this. Let's just say these two pieces were joined together in a part studio, and you wanted to design a bracket in place. So basically what I'd do is I'd use the part studio that is already here and generate the bracket. So let's create a sketch on one of these surfaces. So click sketch. We're going to click the surface here, and then we're going to click N. If you click N, the hotkey N makes your view normal to the screen. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is basically trace out the bracket that I want. So I'm going to utilize let's see, I don't know why it's not attaching there. So basically, you see when it highlights, it's using the references on the piece itself. There's never really, I guess, a right way to do this. So a lot of times I'll just sketch and then make things look better afterwards. So I know this kind of looks a little weird, but I just want to make sure that things that aren't quite defined, I can define them now. What I'm going to do is I see a lot of blue here, right? So blue means that things are not defined. So what I want to do is I want to make sure everything becomes black, right? In order to do that, I need to make sure everything is fully defined. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that these lines align with the references here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a coincident constraint. So you click here, click the line, click the other line, and see now it lines up right on that bracket on the 1x2. Do that with this. So click this, then click this line. So one thing I should note is that a lot of times you don't want to do, well, there are certain instances where you might not want to use external references. And what I mean by external references is that I'm basically using the pieces that I am attaching to as a reference to make sure everything is fully defined. So I'll show you a different method after I do the method in the parser. This is the easier method, but might cause you some issues down the line. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this line perpendicular to this line. All right. And basically, now you see that there are only 3 blue lines left. And if you drag this, you can see what I mean by that. Here and here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a reference. So I need to define this length in this direction. So I'm going to, let's just say, make a dimension. Make a dimension between this hole and this. I don't know why it's not letting me dimension to the center of that hole. Here. What we're going to do, since we need to make these holes anyway, I'm going to use the use or project function. So I'm just going to project this hole. So what it means when you project is that you project a geometry into your sketch, basically. So I'm going to click all these holes here. Let's just say you didn't want to make those holes, but you wanted to be able to use that reference. I think what you could do is, let's just say I want to click this one. Let's just say I didn't want to make the hole. I could change that to a construction line. And that would just allows you to use that geometry, but not actually create any solids from that geometry. So I'm going to turn it back because I actually do want to make that hole. So I'm going to set a dimension from here to the center, and let's just say a 1/2 inch. All right, so we're going to do that with this here, 0.5, and 0.5. All right, so it's kind of hard to see since the lines kind of go right on top of the lines of the parts, but you can kind of see how they're a little thicker around the sides. So I have all the holes defined that I want to attach everything, and I have all of the bracket angles. So you'll notice that I don't have any. I'm just doing the outlines. I haven't put any fillets or any chamfers that I might want on this sketch yet. But everything's black, everything's defined, so we're going to extrude this. All right. So as the problem says, we want this to be 0.09 inches thick. So we're going to create a extrude. We're going to click the sketch, and we want to create a new part. So notice that we have new highlighted here. So I'm going to create a new part, blind. And if you don't know what blind means basically you're extruding out a certain distance that you specify. Obviously, there's a couple of different things, and maybe eventually I'll kind of go over that. We're going to make this blind, and we're going to do 0.09, which is the thickness of the bracket that we want. Okay, so extrude our bracket. So we're almost ready to get there. So one thing to note, you can have a bracket like this if you wanted. It won't be very manufacturable. Whenever you manufacture something, note that whatever the cutter is that you're using, usually it is a circle, whether it is a water jet or it is a wire EDM or a router like we would use. It has a certain radius. So whenever we create brackets, we want to make sure that any inside corners are radiused, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to make the part, or we wouldn't be able to make the part as drawn or as designed. So we're going to put some. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put some radii on these inside corners. There's another reason why we put these radii. If you want to do kind of some research, they're called, you want to reduce any stress concentrations. So anytime there's a sharp corner, if that bracket gets stressed, all the stress goes to any sharp corners. So that's something you'll learn later. All right, so we're going to put radiuses there. I'll leave it, let's just say 0.25 radius for now. Let's make it 0.125. All right, so if you are using a router, let's just say, or a mill to make this, just note that any corners, the radius of any quarters are kind of limited by the cutter that you intend on using. So you want to kind of think about that. Make those corners. And then I'm going to add some chamfers to the corners. So as you know, when we do inspections for the robot, they always look for sharp corners. So one thing we can get around that is basically chamfering these corners. So basically just cutting off the corners. All right, so we're going to do that. Okay, there is our bracket. We press check mark. Looks pretty good. So we're going to assemble this. So we're going to go into the assembly. So you'll notice that This is already in the assembly, so I want to insert this part. So I'm going to insert the part. You see that it's in the part studio, so I'll click here. I'll just put it some random place. I will make it fastened because we don't want it to move ever, and make sure that I highlight this hole, and I highlight this, and we should be good. All right, so obviously this bracket goes on both sides. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build another bracket, basically just building up from the dimensions how I'd want to build this bracket. And just in case I didn't have access to this part studio or didn't want to build, or if the part studio wasn't built in this way. So one thing you can do, another way, so what we're going to do is we're going to insert a new part. Let's just say the part studio wasn't as accessible as we wanted. So we can build it. What we can do is we can build in the assembly itself. Let's see. I think we can do this. Insert. Okay, so it doesn't look like I can add in a part and then edit. I think I need to. All right, so what we're going to do. So first, I want to make sure that the part is named. We're going to name it just so we know what it is later. So, I mean, this is not the best naming convention, but we're going to just say solution example 1 solution 1. Okay. So we're going to create, let's just say we had to create this bracket on its own without utilizing the items in the part studio. So what I'm going to do is we're going to try this. We're going to create a part studio. I wonder if I can. Okay, we're going to create a part studio. So we're going to build this bracket up from scratch. So I think in our CADs that we've done, you've sometimes built brackets from a drawing or something. So right, we're basically going to be doing this exact same thing, but we're going to be kind of designing the bracket on its own. I don't know if that makes sense, but we're going to start a sketch. We're going to start in the front. We're going to click N to make it normal to the sketch. We're just going to draw a rectangle. And we're going to draw another line. So this is why it's sketching, because you don't know exactly what you're drawing until you completely make it. So I just kind of made something in general. I don't think in Onshape you really have to have enclosed spaces, but I like, things to be clean. So I don't like lines like that going across. But that's just me. In some other programs like PTC Creo, I think because I'm used to that, sometimes you have to get rid of those lines. Otherwise, it won't extrude correctly. All right, so I'm going to add a dimension. We know this is 1 inch across. So we'll say 1. I'm going to change this. What we can do is we can set this line equal to this line using a constraint. So I like to use as many constraints as possible just to make things a little cleaner instead of dimensioning everything. So it's a good idea to learn how to use all these constraints. We're going to set this angle. So we're going to just check mark. I just want to check some of the angles. So remember what we were looking at here. The angle is I hate that it doesn't give me that right angle. If I do this. 53.6 degrees. All right. So let me go back to my sketch. I'm going to say make this 53.6 degrees. 53.6. Okay. Let's see. Can I go? All right. So I know I want this bracket to span across, let's say, how many holes is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes. Half inch on each side. So 5 plus 1. So 6 inches. So we're going to make this 6 inches. All right. Let's see. We're going to figure out what is the distance from here, because we want to locate this hole, right? So this hole is going to locate these two holes. This hole plus the angle basically locates where this bar is, right? So we're going to measure from this side to, let's measure not on the bracket, but we'll measure on the piece. So this, we're going to measure from here to here. So whenever you measure from a plane, I like to measure from a plane if I'm measuring a specific distance, just because it shows the center distance. Yeah, so we want the distance to the center of the hole, right? So let's see. We want the distance. Yeah. So when you do center distance, see how this is 0, this is 0. When you're measuring to a plane, basically it extends the plane out so that you can only get one distance. So 2.9, that big number. I'm just going to right click here and you should be able to copy. All right. So that's the distance from here to the center of the hole in relation to that plane. So it kind of projects that distance onto the plane. I don't know if that makes sense. But we're going to use that distance. So we're going to put that distance. We're going to make a hole here. And we're going to put, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, wait, what do we measure from? We measure from here to there. So that's here to here. Oops. Yeah, I should click dimension first. So dimension, there to there. I'm going to paste in that value. All right, so that's where that hole is, right? That's a hole in this distance. So I have to figure out in the vertical distance what that dimension is. So I'm going to click here, another surface. I like to measure to surfaces generally. And then I'm going to click the hole, expand it. So minimum distance is literally the minimum distance to that surface. But generally you want center axis difference so that you can get the center of the hole, which is a lot more useful. So you notice negative 0.307. So that is our value. Oh, is sometimes it, I mean, really, you don't really care too much about all the decimals. Mostly after 3 places, it doesn't really matter. But let's just copy that value. All right, so we're going to make that dimension from here to here and paste that dimension. Why did you do that? Oh, negative. Okay, so we want that above. And then what is the diameter of these holes? Diameter of these holes are 0.163. Okay, so we're going to make the diameter 0.163. 0.63. Okay, so we know that this hole is in the center between these two, right? So let's, before we make that dimension, I'm going to drag this over to make sure it is already kind of in between those spots. So mic knocked over. Okay, so we're going to add a dimension from here to here, and we know that is 0.5 because it's centered between those two. Okay, We're also going to add a hole here for these on this bracket. And we're going to make the diameter of these two equal by using a constraint equal. Click that, equal. We're going to dimension this hole because notice it's blue, which means that it's not defined. So like I said, when something's blue, try moving it around, see what happens. See how I can move this in any direction. So I'm going to add a dimension here. What do we want this to be? 0.5. All right, so now get out of the dimensions by pressing escape. Now I'm going to move it. It's still blue, but see how it only moves, no matter what I do, it only moves in that direction because the left to right motion is constrained by this dimension, right? So we want to constrain the up and down motion. So what do? We add a dimension. All right, so to the bottom, to here, we want what? 0.5. All right. So I can add a bunch of holes, but I'm lazy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is figure out, okay, I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 holes. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use a linear pattern. So we're going to click pattern, click the feature we want to pattern. You notice how in this direction there's 1x, and 1x includes the original, so there's nothing else up here, right? So in this direction, what did we say? I totally forgot. We said we want 5 holes. So we're going to change this. Oh, wait. That number is the distance between the first hole and all subsequent holes. So we're going to change this to 5. Something's wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I messed up my dimensions. So 1, 2, 3, 4 between 5 holes, and then a half. So we're going to change that. All right. So this should be 5. Okay, that looks like it makes more sense. All right. So you notice that all these are black. That's great. Okay. So we want to pattern holes on this particular hole, right? Right. So that one is a little bit more complicated, but what's cool about the patterns in we might try to do this pattern in a different way. So you can do the same way like I'll do it in 2 different ways. Okay, so we'll do the rectangular pattern. We're going to click this. But you notice it only goes left and right. Okay? That's kind of unfortunate. But this is what we're going to do. We're going to change this. How many holes do we want? So the other one, we're going to just do something slightly different. Let's say we want 3 holes instead of 2. So this one uses 2. We're going to do 3 holes. So we're going to go back to the Part Studio. We're going to change this number to, well, it's okay. It's already 3. So I'm going to, I guess it confirmed the pattern after I switched. But sometimes you may have to click the screen in order to confirm the pattern. You'll see like a thing on your icon that says, actually, let me show you. Okay, so I Control Z to go back. So I click linear pattern. I did that. We want 3, and you see how the cursor turns into like mouse click, and it shows a little check mark on the left mouse button. That means you click that button to confirm. So I'm going to click that button, and it confirms it. And you notice how it's black. So that means it's fully defined. The default state for this is that it's in the horizontal or vertical direction, right? So I want to change that. So I'm going to click on this line, and then you notice how it has, when I hover over it, it has these constraints, right? So this constraint is constraining it to be only horizontal. So I'm going to click that constraint. I want to delete it. So I'm going to click delete, and it goes away. Notice how these turn blue now. So now when I click and drag, see how it turns in all these directions. Okay? So I'm going to turn it in the general vicinity of what I want. Okay? And what can I do to make it not move? I can add a constraint, right? So I'm going to add a constraint is I want it to be parallel. I want this line here to be parallel to that line. So what constraint do I use? I use a parallel constraint, obviously, right? So click parallel, you click the line, you click the other line. There you go. So your holes, let's just say I want to add, later on, let's just say I wanted to add another few holes. So we're going to make this 4 holes. I'm going to say 4. See, it continues in that direction, right? So you notice how my holes are going longer than the bracket, right? So I'm gonna just see how this is blue. It's not constrained. So I want to constrain it to the last hole. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a dimension. So click here, and I'm gonna say 0.5. Okay. So everything is black. Just, this is great because now everything is fully defined. So I'm gonna click check mark on our bracket. I think I won't say. So right now we're going to extrude this bracket. So we'll do extrude. It detects a sketch, and we're gonna make it new. So I'm gonna click here, and what is our bracket thickness? We're gonna do 0.09. All right. So we're gonna do bracket. So the bracket is all on its own. We're gonna add fillets, and we're gonna do that here. Let's make this one, instead of the 0.125 earlier, let's make it 0.25. Sometimes with acute angles, it might be a good idea to add, depending on how much stress you think this joint will take, we can always add in more material on a specific side or something. So we added our 2 fillets, 0.25 inch radius. We add in our chamfers. We'll make this 0.125 like the other one. Click this. There you go. Okay. Check mark there. And then we'll name this example 1 solution standalone. Not great naming practice, but whatever. Okay, so we go into our assembly and we're going to assemble it. See our 1 bracket over there. Let's change the color on this one. We're going to change this to edit appearance. Let's make this deep red. I don't know, for no reason. Okay, so we go to our assembly. We click insert in our current document. See, there's another part studio now. So we're going to say example 1 standalone, and we're going to place it in our assembly. Then we use our trusty fasten mate, and we click, let's use this one. We're going to click in this hole, and you notice it's not in the right position. We're going to flip it, and we're going to rotate it. Yeah, right. Perfect. Everything lines up perfectly. So 2 different ways to make this bracket in different ways. Looks like everything lines up perfectly, which is amazing. That's pretty much it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.